This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here he is, the host of the podcast, AWR Hawkins.
Welcome to Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart News podcast focused on guns, gun rights, the Second Amendment. We sum those things up here each week under the banner of freedom, and we do it because an armed citizen is a free citizen. It's really as simple as that. And, this week we had another reminder in a negative sense of the truth of that summary. That is, that an armed citizen is free. The Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh was attacked by an animal who shot and killed 11 people. That synagogue was without any armed protection. There were no good guys with guns. And so the attacker was able to do whatever he wanted to do. I know that in the left's mind, the left gives us a world where if we'll disarm, they'll disarm. You remember they did that with the Soviet Union during the 80s. During the 80s, they maligned Reagan. They maligned Reagan and called him the warmonger. He was the one forcing the Soviet Union to arm up. He was the one causing the arms race. In reality, what he was doing is being sure good guys had guns in case the bad guy struck, if you want to break it down to its simplest form. And he knew, and rational people knew, if we didn't have missiles and other weaponry superior to the Russians, or at least on par with them, if we didn't, then they would strike. But as long as we did have them, they would know that to strike us would be to sign their own certificate for their own destruction, because we would respond in kind with equal or greater force. You can apply that to individual situations today. That idea was not just valid in the 80s. It was not just valid under Teddy Roosevelt, who used his Navy to make the same point that Reagan made with nuclear arms. It is always valid, and you can look at individual situations, and you can look at the synagogue, sadly. And Trump picked up on this. Perhaps you heard him. We covered it at Breitbart. Not long after the attack and news of it was coming through, President Trump lamented the fact that there was no armed security in that synagogue. He lamented that fact. And his words were well chosen. He said, I wish there had been armed security because this would have gone differently. And isn't he right? Isn't he right? If that attacker had entered that building and instead of meeting the unarmed masses that he met, what if he had entered that building and 2 or 3 well-positioned people pulled a gun and put it on him? Then the stories Saturday would have been, gunman enters synagogue with bad intent or ill intent, dies before he can pull the trigger. Now that's a heck of a story right there. That's a heck of a story. That's how it's supposed to work in America. Now, folks, we've had a lot of response to this synagogue attack, and most of it, Trump, as I say, was extremely rational. But apart from President Trump, a lot of what we've heard in the wake of the attack it's just been lunacy. For example, as I say, President Trump lamented the absence of armed security. Said if there had been armed security, this would have ended different. He said the lack of armed security allowed the gunman to do things he should not have been able to do. In other words, he was able to have power over these people in a way he would not have been able to have power over them had someone armed been there, had there been a good guy with a gun. Trump's comments are extremely rational. But the response to his comments has been anything but rational. You had Senator Chris Murphy in Connecticut. He's a Democrat. And let's be honest, we don't expect too much to come out of his mouth that makes sense, right? But I mean, he really stepped it up in response to President Trump. He said President Trump wants, quote unquote, gunmen with semi-automatic rifles in restaurants and churches and schools, etc., etc. That's his response. In other words, he uses the language of that is used to describe criminals. He uses that language, applies it to Trump. And what it does is it makes it sound like Trump wants the kind of gunmen that people fear. Trump wants attackers. That's not what Trump was saying. He was saying he wants good guys with guns in place in case an attacker strikes, so the attacker pays the price. Tell me this, folks, those of you that have kids young enough to go to school. If an armed gunman breaks into that school, what do you want? Do you want to take solace in the fact that Senator Murphy won the day and there were no good guys with guns there to protect your kids? Is that what you want? Or if news breaks that it's your school that's been targeted by one of these animals, do you go, oh, man, I'm so glad we made the decision to allow teachers to carry guns for self-defense, that we have an armed resource officer at our school. You see the difference in how that feels? Not just how it feels, but how it is. For Senator Murphy to mock Trump for wanting good guys with guns to defend the defenseless, it's beyond the pale. But Murphy wasn't alone. Guess who else joined in? The mayor of Pittsburgh, the city where this happened, Bill Peduto. No joke. Bill Peduto, the Democrat mayor of Pittsburgh, said that putting armed security in synagogues, in places of worship, is not the right response to the attack on the synagogue. What? Now think about it again. What I'm going to say is going to sound so ignorant. You're going to think I twisted his words. I'm not twisting his words. What he's doing, here is a mayor responding to an attack on defenseless people in his own city. The attacker used a gun in a place where no one could shoot back. And the mayor says, having someone there who can shoot back, that's a paraphrase, but that's what he's saying. Having someone there who can shoot back is not the answer. What? If that's true, why doesn't the mayor give up his armed detail? Why doesn't the mayor vow that he will no longer let police or whoever protects him protect him? Why doesn't he do that? See, this is how the left works. The left has one set of rules for themselves and another set of rules for the commoners. So we've got Senator Chris Murphy, we've got Mayor Peduto, and guess who else? That's right, Barack Obama. Barack Obama comes out against anti-Semitism, against quote-unquote hateful rhetoric, and then he tacks on to the end that we need more gun control. Folks, listen to this. The attacker, the synagogue attacker, had a concealed carry permit or a license to carry. I'll word it that way. Those of you who have a license to carry, and I assume many of you do, you know one of the major parts of acquiring that license is going through a background check. Not just once, but upon renewal. Depending on what state you're in, you have to renew every 2 years, every 3 years, every 5 years. And each time you do a renewal, you go through another background check. See, the left has always told us that background checks will make us safe. If we just have background checks, we'll be safe. Folks, the synagogue gunman went through background checks. It didn't do anything to stop him, much less hinder him. All right? And so here you have Barack Obama, though, the same song and dance. More gun control, more gun control, more gun control. Folks, I want to read something to you, and I take a risk by reading this. I really do. I'm going to risk belaboring a point, but I think it's important. It's just important for you to hear this. The fact that what I'm going to do right now will make you feel tired, to give you some idea of how long this list is, all right? Here we go, folks. A list of attackers, just some, not all. I wouldn't give you an exhaustive list because you would turn this off and never listen again. It would bore you so badly. I'm just give you a list of some of the attackers who passed background checks for their guns. The Parkland High School attacker, the Texas Church attacker, the Las Vegas attacker, the Alexandria attacker. You remember him during the Republican baseball practice. The Orlando Pulse attacker, the UCLA gunman. That was a murder-suicide on June 1st, 2016. The San Bernardino attackers, the Colorado Springs attacker, the Community College in Oregon attacker, Allison Parker's attacker, the Lafayette movie attacker, the Chattanooga attacker. You remember he attacked military installations. The alleged Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal attacker, the Muhammad Cartoon Contest attackers, the Las Vegas cop killers, the Santa Barbara attacker, the Fort Hood attacker. That's the one in April 2014. The Arapahoe High School attacker, the D.C. Navy Yard attacker, the Aurora Movie Theater attacker, Gabby Giffords attacker, the Fort Hood attacker. That's the one in 2009. The Virginia Tech attacker, and many others. I could keep reading. Now, as I'm reading that, those of you who are paying attention are going, wait, you just listed every high-profile attacker, almost every high-profile attacker of the last 10 years. That's exactly right. They all pass background checks to get their guns. It's how they do it. Yet, the left responds to attacks. Instead of responding honestly and going, guess what? Gun control is a failure. Instead of doing that, they respond and go, we need more gun control. We need more gun control. No, we don't need more gun control. We need more freedom. We need these animals to know if they come in the synagogue, to quote Trump's phrase, bullets are going to be flying both ways, right? They need to know that. They need to know that the moment they step in there with bad intent, it's on. They need to know that. Folks, we've got this Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan has got a tweet out asking Americans to at least consider giving up some of their guns. Will you at least consider it? Folks, think about this. Our whole problem is that this gunman attacked an area where there were no good guys with guns. I know I've said that over and over in this segment, but I can't say it enough. There were none. No one could respond. No one could meet force with force. And what's Piers Morgan ask? He asked us to give up some of our guns. In other words, to put ourselves in an even weaker position. No thanks, Piers. No thanks. You know, Piers Morgan, he says he especially wants us to give up those AR-15s because those are the ones used most of the time in high-profile shootings. I'm sorry, but that's not true. I'm sorry, but it's not. The Rockefeller Institute of Government released a study that covered a 50-year time span, 1966 through 2016. 1966 through 2016. And what did they find? High-profile attackers prefer handguns over rifles of any kind by a 3-to-1 margin. Facts are stubborn things, Pierce. Facts are stubborn things. Folks, you're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
I want to actually take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop. And then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International. Ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents. His wealth, his achievement. Capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. Folks, there's some other gun news we need to cover too. Not just the Synagogue shooting, although that horrendous shooting is front and center. But folks, you have coming up, we've been discussing it for a while, coming up a week from today, I believe, we have the midterms. Folks, you have to be prepared to vote to secure your freedom, to defend your freedom. If you don't believe me, if you live in California 49, California 48, or California 25, you have congressional candidates, they're Democrats, running for office who are pushing gun control right now based on the Synagogue attack. Now, here is the simplest way I can put this. I put it this way when I was speaking with my friend Mark Walters, host of Armed American Radio. If they will campaign in this manner, in other words, during their campaign, they'll pull aside to push gun control, what do you think they're going to do once you elect them? And think also, pushing gun control for someone who complied with all gun control in order to get his guns. Again, what these people should be doing is saying, you know what, gun control is a failure. But you don't hear that from anybody. You don't hear that from anybody. Folks, in addition to that, keep in mind, you've got John Tester in Montana, who voted in 2015 for restrictions on the Second Amendment. He voted for an expansion of the prohibited buyers list on background checks. All right. He did that in 2015 following the San Bernardino attack, in which 2 people gunned down 14 people in a what? Gun-free zone. Just like the Synagogue, they went in there and they knew no one could respond. No one could stop them. Folks, Senator John Tester supported more gun control for law-abiding citizens in response to that. That was 2015. After the Orlando Pulse attack in 2016, that was June 12, 2016, he supported gun control again. Now, in case you don't remember, the Orlando Pulse attack took place in a gun-free zone. Right? Folks, it's simply hard to believe that John Tester is campaigning as if he is pro-gun. He voted against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, both of whom were Trump's superb pro-Second Amendment justices. Yet Tester tells you he's pro-gun control. If you live in Montana, you're better than that. You're better than that. Those of you listening in North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp has got to go. You're better than that. She's another gun controller. She voted against Brett Kavanaugh. Folks, those of you that live in Missouri, Claire McCaskill has got to go. You're better than that. Vote for Josh Hawley. Seriously. This is the opportunity to shore up the Senate. These midterms are an opportunity to make the Senate pro-Trump, period, down the line. Down the line. We can do that. We just have to show up and we have to vote, folks. We have to show up and vote, all right? Now, there's a lot of other gun news from this week that needs to be covered. As I say, that happened prior to the shooting at the synagogue. Let me also point out, too, while I'm doing red state Democrats, Senator Bill Nelson in Florida, he's campaigning on putting in place gun controls that already exist. Let me say that again because I know it sounded funny. He's campaigning on putting in place gun controls that already exist, chiefly background checks. Now, I won't belabor that. We've already been through it. But the gunman at the synagogue went through background checks. I mean, this is ridiculous. Democrats, as you know, they don't have new ideas. They run the same campaign over and over and over. And they use the same phrases over and over and over. Gun show loophole. Semi-automatic rifles. Assault weapons. On and on. Carrying hidden guns in public. That's how they describe a concealed carry. Carrying loaded, hidden guns in public. You see that? When a rational person describes concealed carry, they say, hey, concealed carry. And you understand, that means carrying a gun for self-defense. When the Democrats describe concealed carry, they talk about carrying loaded, hidden guns in public. It communicates a completely different idea. Folks, Democrats can't be trusted with your gun rights. They can't be. Vote these people out. Vote them out. Now, folks, those of you who are in Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema is a threat to your Second Amendment rights. At Breitbart, we've reached out to her office numerous times. When I say numerous, I don't mean twice. I don't mean 3 times. Numerous times. 5, 6, 7 times. We've talked to them on the phone. They won't answer any questions regarding her gun control positions. None. They won't clarify. She used to want to license all gun owners. They won't clarify whether she still does. They won't clarify whether she supports an assault weapons ban. She co-sponsored legislation to expand background checks in 2017. They won't tell us whether she still wants to expand them or not. And she's running for Senate in a gun-friendly state like Arizona? Martha McSally is the Republican. She's pro-gun. This is a no-brainer. This is a no-brainer. McSally will defend gun rights. Sinema will go to war with gun rights. Folks, as I say, this is our chance to shore up the Senate. Shore it up. Don't make it weaker. Shore it up. All right? Folks, the left is just, they're just off the chain when it comes to this stuff. I'm going to mispronounce her name, but we have an American huntress, Larsa Switlik. I know I've mispronounced her name, and I apologize. She's facing death threats for shooting a wild goat in Scotland. We covered that this week, and man, it's fitting. It's fitting amid the lunacy that we're hearing in response to the synagogue shooting. The fact that Trump is being derided for wanting citizens to be able to shoot back. The fact that it is being treated as a crazy thought. that citizens should be able to protect themselves, that synagogues should have armed security. The fact that the left responds that way, it's just one more indication of how crazy they are. And so is this treatment of this huntress. This woman shot legally, shot a wild goat on a hunt in Scotland. She's getting death threats. Shot a wild goat. She's getting death threats. Folks, we've seen this again and again. You remember the huntress from Kentucky? We covered it at Breitbart. She shot a black giraffe legally. I have to stress that, because when I say legally on these types of hunts, that means that with conservation groups, with hunting management groups, there was a consensus and an approval that we need this many tags sold in order to keep that particular species at the right level. At the right level. A level at which it can be sustained by the environment in which it lives. A level at which it is stronger rather than weaker. They carry out these hunts after permits are issued, after consensus is reached between conservation groups and hunting management. Yet, despite the fact that the hunts are legal, people on the left go nuts. So you had a woman from Kentucky shot a black giraffe legally, and they threatened to kill her. Had a woman shoot an American woman shoot a wild goat in Scotland. They threatened to kill her. Wow. Wow. The left is unhinged, folks. The fact that any Democrat will get one vote in the midterm elections is an embarrassment. It is an embarrassment, because they are at war with your freedom. You notice people like Senator Bill Nelson. His litmus test for the Second Amendment, by the way, is not whether a gun is valuable for self-defense. His litmus test is only if a gun is something used for hunting. Hunting. If it's not used for hunting, he doesn't like it. News to Senator Nelson, the Second Amendment isn't about hunting. The Second Amendment is about defending our most precious property, our own lives. But that being said, even when the leftist leaders put so much value on hunting, then you have two female Americans hunting, legally killing animals. They're threatened with death. The left is unhinged, period. They're unhinged. They want solutions, they say. But the solutions can't involve guns. They're pro-hunting, they say. But you let a woman go to Scotland and shoot a wild goat, and she gets death threats. The left is unhinged. Folks, you're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Censorship is a key issue here, particularly for people on the right. Do you think it was addressed adequately?
Definitely not. It was useful to name check Diamond and Silk. It was useful to check even politicians who had campaign ads that were shut down. But in every case, Zuckerberg was allowed to essentially dismiss the case and move on.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins, folks. You want to know just how bad it is if you are if you're a leftist, if you're a gun controller. Tell me this, how many leftists have you seen calling for gun control because of the violence in Chicago? How many? None. None that I can think of. If you can think of one, let me know. Right? But here's the deal. 43 people were shot and wounded in Chicago over the weekend. 43. 5 were killed. See this? Add that up. 43. It's a lot of people. But I don't see the left demanding gun control because of that. I really don't. I don't hear the left saying it's time for common sense gun control. I don't see the congressional Democrat candidates in California pointing to Chicago saying, there you go, we need more gun control. And you know why, of course, because they already have so many gun limitations in Chicago, so many Second Amendment restrictions, and none of it's working. None of it's working. Folks, I told my friend, Mark Walters, who I've already mentioned once in this podcast, but I told him during my segment on his show that I'm making an effort. I'm going to make it with you right now. I hope I've done this in the podcast already successfully, but I want to make an effort to help people understand that gun control is not a valid substitute for freedom. It's just not. And you have to look at things that way. You have to understand it that way. When people pass gun control, like when they put in place a gun-free zone or anything of that manner, what they're doing is they're saying this is better. This is better than you being armed. But it's not. And the fact that attack after attack after attack happens in a gun-free zone, the fact that attacker after attacker after attacker acquires his or her guns by complying with gun control proves gun control is not a valid substitute for freedom. These are two very different worldviews. A gun control worldview says, let's pass laws that disarm everyone for the common good. But there is no common good. It's all a lie, because laws passed to disarm everyone only disarm the law-abiding, period. You could try to make it sound as egalitarian as you wish, but it's not going to work. It will only disarm the law-abiding. And the examples of that are legion, all right? But the worldview that hugs freedom, that clings to freedom, says, you know what? All the laws in the world are not going to make criminals follow laws. So we need to be armed for the preservation of our most precious possession, our own lives. Folks, that is how it's supposed to work. You want proof? The same day that the synagogue shooting occurred, a masked gunman charged into a McDonald's in Alabama and opened fire. You didn't hear much about this. Why? Because a father who was in that McDonald's eating with his 2 sons jerked his pistol and put it on the attacker, and the attacker died. It was late at night. The drive-thru was open, but the lobby had closed. The manager opened the lobby door to allow the father and his 2 sons to exit. And as they exited, or were trying to, the gunman allegedly charged in and just began shooting. The father was able to pull his gun and shoot the gunman, who died. You see that, folks? Had that been a gun-free restaurant, the father, being law-abiding, would have not had his gun with him, and he and his sons would have simply been killed. That's what I mean. Gun control is no substitute, not a valid substitute for freedom. And this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Folks, covered a story this week at Breitbart News. Cindy Chester. She was a victim of domestic violence when she was 21. This is extremely violent. Her ex-boyfriend shot her with a 12 gauge and hit her in a way that her leg was amputated. And she's an amputee. That happened, as I say, when she was 21. I think she's in her early 30s now. She was interviewed by Time Magazine, and we wrote up the interview because she said something very profound. She said, I strongly believe in the Second Amendment. And she talked about how Americans have to have the right to have a gun with them for self-defense. And she stressed that her situation could have been different if she had been armed when she was attacked. This is firsthand account here. This is not me opining on, I bet she felt this way. No. This is her saying, this is how I feel. This is how I see it. This is what I believe. She says if she had been armed, things could have been different. In other words, if she had been armed, she might still have two legs. This real life account, folks. But because she wasn't armed, that animal with the shotgun was able to do damage to her that will be with her whole life. We have to come to some degree of understanding here, folks. We have to understand that the gun is the great equalizer. And if that woman had been armed, as she says, she'd be different today than she is. That situation would have gone differently than it did. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Folks, thanks for listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins this week. I hope you get your friends, your family members, your co-workers to listen. And listen, tell them all after they've listened. Tell them to go back to the original page of the podcast and give us reviews. We need all the 5-star reviews we can get. Also, folks, remind them to go to iTunes to subscribe. You know, you go to iTunes, you subscribe, it downloads for free to your phone each week. And each Tuesday morning, you'll see it right there. So, folks, remember to vote. If you're in a state, if you have early voting right now, remember to get out there and vote. And let's get rid of the red state Democrats. Let's vote them out of office. And let's shore up the Senate. And between now and then and beyond then, keep in mind that the Democrat push to disarm us is ridiculous and it's illogical. The only thing that'll stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That's it. That's the only thing. That's the only thing that will work. So you need to be the good guy with the gun. You need to be the good girl with the gun. We have to be the good people with guns. Again, I'm not asking you to be paranoid. I'm just saying you need to be prepared. Always remember, more guns equal more freedom.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
I said that it's the epitome of hypocrisy. Unless you fall in line with their liberal agenda, this uniparty, globalist, liberal agenda, they will never support you. They use the whole gender issue, of course, as some kind of tool to prop up their messaging, but it's the phoniest thing.
Sirius XM Patriot, Channel 125.